Well, if it had not been for the music of Beethoven, I would have been a scientist. My parents gave me a microscope for my 10th birthday. I gave myself headaches by looking in it for hours. The first thing I saw was a hair plucked from my own head, as fat and shiny as that tarred telephone pole near our front walk. Somebody ask around if you've never seen a tarred telephone pole. I know they're buried here. After that, I tried everything that would fit under the eyepiece: flower petals, dirt, wings from dead flies. I spent the better part of an afternoon with a dropper of pond water. And once I worked at my nerve, a smear of my own blood was as beautiful to me as a red stained glass window. The next year, there was the chemistry set with the requisite explosions, followed by this electromagnetic device that made all the hairs on my arm stand up. In high school, even as I spent my Saturdays teaching music theory to children, I took physics, chemistry, and math analysis. I violated the unwritten academic caste system of the high school by belonging to both the band and the science club. In college, as a music major who led the children's choir at church, I satisfied my science requirement with organic chemistry, while my saxophone-playing roommate slept through what was called science appreciation. As I held that tension, I learned from my professors that science and religion are two very different things. Science dealt with the physical world. It was interested in how things worked. Science was objective. Science dealt with facts. Religion, on the other hand, dealt with the spiritual world. It was less interested in how things worked than in what they meant and how human beings should behave in relationship to them. Religion was subjective. Religion was about values. This is the tension that we're holding in our conversation today. In this continuing episode of the Big Bang Theory, Amy is hoping to encourage Sheldon in the skill of holding tension. Does her therapy bother you? In the ancient world, religion and science were little more than two ways to be curious. The truths that each of them told were assumed to be divine. The world had not yet split into secular and sacred. The divorce came in the 16th century when Copernicus guessed that the earth circled the sun, not vice versa. For the first time, the truth that could be observed in the real world conflicted with the truth revealed by Scripture. Copernicus and the Bible could not both be right in the placement of the planets. And thus, the scientific revolution began. The church stuck with the Bible, condemning both Copernicus and Galileo as heretics. The scientific community drew away from the church, choosing truth that could be seen over truth that could not. So when the astronomer Pierre de Laplace explained nature as a self-sufficient mechanism, the Emperor Napoleon asked him where that left God. Laplace replied, "I have no need for that hypothesis." Ever since then, it seems, science and religion have been engaged in a head-butting match. At issue are their different perspectives on truth, and in particular, their disagreement about whether or not creation shows evidence of some supreme will at work. I watched this battle take place on automobile bumpers in the rural South where my dad lived. First, there was the silverfish emblem, meant to let me know that the driver in the car ahead of me was a Christian. Given the way that some of these people drove, I'm not sure that the advertisement was really a good idea. Then came the little silverfish emblem with the 2 little feet added and the name Darwin inside. I assume that this either meant that the driver of the car ahead of me was not a Christian or was a Christian evolutionist. Then I saw the 3rd emblem. A big silverfish with its mouth wide open, gobbling up the little silverfish with feet. The little fish still said Darwin inside, and the big fish said truth. Now, this would be funnier if the battle were confined to automobile bumpers, but unfortunately it was not. My dad's neighbor, who was both a church-going Southern Baptist and a biology professor at the community college, remembered being attacked from both sides when he was earning his PhD. His church family disowned him for teaching science that contradicted the Bible, and his scientific community scorned him for believing in God. On Sunday afternoon several years ago, I paid a visit on a 90-year-old woman. She was one of those elderly people whose appearance deceived. Behind her very high white forehead and clouded over eyes was this fully engaged mind and formidable spirit. She wanted to talk about evolution, and so we talked about evolution, or rather I listened to her talk about evolution, and especially the danger of teaching this wrong-headed notion in public schools. The very idea, said this woman, who had been born 30 years after Darwin died. Can you imagine teaching children that they came from monkeys instead of from God? I said something inane, like I thought evolution itself might be like a kind of miracle. But she was adamant. Janet, you can't have it both ways, she said. We are either here by design or we are here by chance. Well, the very next day, I taught my disciple class on the book of Genesis, the creation story, explaining to my students how important it was for the Hebrews to put their story down on paper. And you know the opening words of Genesis 1 from the Common English Bible. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was without shape or form. It was dark over the deep sea, and God's wind swept over the waters. God said, "Let there be light," and so light appeared. God saw how good the light was. God separated the light from the darkness. God named the light day and the darkness night. There was evening and there was morning the first day. Now, this need to write it down was especially true if Genesis was written in Babylon while the Hebrew people were in exile, as most scholars believe today. Because in the Babylonian creation story from that foreign culture, the cosmos is made from the dismembered corpse of the goddess Tiamat, whose skull is split open by her youngest son, Marduk. Babylonian creation story. By murdering his evil mother, Marduk brought order out of chaos with an act of redemptive violence. Now, this was not the story that the Hebrew parents wanted their Babylonian-born children to learn in school. So they sat down their own account about a good creation made by a good God, which went a long way to setting them apart from the culture in which they lived. They reserved the right to say where they had come from, I told my class. They would not let anyone else do that for them because they knew that their identity as a people depended on the stories they told about themselves. Well, the minute I said that, I knew that the old woman was right. In her stubborn way, she was refusing the dominant scientific, cultural definition of her as a haphazard product of random variations. That creation myth was as unacceptable to her as the one about Tiamat and Marduk. She reserved the right to say where she had come from. And the Genesis story was the one that she chose. Now, Adam Hamilton, in his book, Seeing Gray in a World of Black and White, invites holding tension as he puts forth the three dominant responses that Christians make to evolution today. All three of these dominant responses to evolution are a part of the conversation in South Denver. These are a part of the conversation in schools and parochial schools in South Denver. When I lived in Colorado Springs, I attended a public meeting of young Earth creation scientists. What a kick. I was curious about what these folks were like who were championing this view, creation science. This was an energetic gathering featuring very learned lecturers seeking to make a case for a young Earth and a literal reading of the creation account in Genesis. The first speaker referred to the Genesis account as the historical record, composed by the only one who was actually present for the creation, God. Creation scientists begin their work with the belief that the earth is less than 10,000 years old, a belief that is drawn in part by stringing together the chronologies that exist in the Hebrew Bible. Many believe that everything that existed was created in 6 24-hour periods, and that the flood described in the Bible occurred around 5,000 years ago and can explain fossils, ice ages, and the formation of the continents. With this as their starting point, they then develop theories as to how all the data from nature can fit into these parameters. A second Christian response to evolution is what is today called intelligent design. Intelligent design proponents look at evolution and disagree with its basic foundational premise. They're not arguing that the earth is less than 10,000 years old. They don't disagree with some of the principles of Darwin's theory. They're not trying to make science fit into a literal reading of Genesis. But they look at what we can observe in the physical world, particularly the complexity that they see in life, and they believe that this cannot adequately be explained by evolution. There is evidence, they say, in biology, cosmology, and in the natural world for an interaction with an intelligence, that creation calls out for a creator. So the central question of this perspective is it guided or is it unguided? In a third response, Christians look at the evolutionary theory and believe it makes sense as a mechanism describing the origin and development of life forms. Like those who support intelligent design, these reject the idea that evolution is unsupervised, impersonal, unplanned, and purposeless. You're hearing the tension. They embrace evolution, but see evolution itself as God's plan. The Bible tells us that God spoke and life developed. But regarding how God did that, the Bible is silent. These Christians believe that evolution explains the process by which God brought life into the world from the dust of the earth. They don't see evolution as a threat to the Christian faith, nor do they believe that Christianity and evolution are mutually exclusive ideas. Holding tension is difficult. It was this kind of dualistic or either-or thinking that led me to start reading science again. No one I know was very interested in science until the publication of Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief History of Time, in 1988. And maybe it was the author himself that captivated our imagination. This diminutive Stephen Hawking, propped in his wheelchair, that fragile body wasted by Lou Gehrig's disease, while his robust mind roamed the stars. But I think it was actually more than that. I think it was also his quest for a theory of everything that caught people's attention. Even those of us who did not have much of a clue about what that meant found ourselves drawn to that idea. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to understand everything? Wouldn't it be wonderful to discover the unity at the heart of all diversity? A theory that would tie everything together instead of driving it further and further apart. If we do discover a complete theory, Hawking wrote, it should be understandable by everyone, not just a few scientists. Then we shall all, philosophers, scientists, and just ordinary people, be able to take part in the discussion of why it is that we and the universe exist. If we find the answer to that, it would be the ultimate triumph of human reason, for then we would truly know the mind of God. So those of you that follow the television show, The Big Bang Theory, know that Stephen Hawking is one of Sheldon's heroes. Sheldon's drive for a theory of everything, I think, pushes his need for resolution and makes it so difficult for him to hold tension. At this point in my own reading and thinking, I do not believe that science and religion can or should be reconciled. I believe this is one of those conversations in which we hold tension. The methods, the interests, the ways of knowing things are too different to come together and mesh them. There are two distinct ways of looking at the world, and each has its own beauties. And when we invade each other's territory, damage is generally done. As when religionists decide that evolution and the Big Bang Theory are not essential to public school curricula. Or when scientists liken belief in God to belief in fairies. But neither should we back off from the conversation and the dialogue. Holding the tension keeps us open to both observation and revelation. Bob and I enjoy the 4th of July fireworks from the field at Coors Field. Explosions just open like flowers, with green blossoming into blue and spilling out into spores of white. And red hearts grow larger as they fly toward us. And triple-tiered fountains of gold spew silver stars. The sky is so bright that all of the people around us on their blankets are no more than dark silhouettes. Last summer, about 10 feet away from our blanket, there was a young child, a little girl, sitting on her dad's shoulders. And every time there was a new display in the sky, she would reach up with her right hand and try to curl her fingers around the light, just giggling uncontrollably. She did this over and over again, so that all of my memories of that vastly different fireworks display has this same small, dark hand in them, reaching for the sky. And as far as I know, she was never able to catch a spark. But the beauty was, she never stopped trying. Amen.